You can live in Australia your entire life and still hear a geography fact about this country that makes you say, hang on, what? Because some of the real facts about Australia sound more like things somebody made up at the pub. There's an Australian island that has literally been getting bigger. The entire country has officially moved without anybody noticing, and some of our state borders didn't even end up where they were originally supposed to go, and so much more. And stay until number 9, because there's something you can see in the night sky that Australia is actually wider than. And yes, every one of these is real. Here are 9 Australian geography facts that sound made up. Number 1, the journey's so straight you can go hundreds of kilometres without turning. If you think Australian roads are long, wait until you get to the Nullarbor. The Trans-Australian Railway has a section of track that runs dead straight for 478 kilometres. No curve, no bend, nothing. 478 kilometres in the same direction. It holds the world record for the longest straight stretch of railway track. At some point, you'd almost want the train to turn just to prove it still can. And if you're driving instead, Australia still isn't finished with you. The Eyre Highway has the famous 90-mile straight, about 146 kilometres of road without a bend. Tourism Western Australia describes it as the longest straight stretch of road in the world. Imagine driving for 146 kilometres and the sat-nav's entire contribution is keep going, and going, and going. By the time the first corner finally appears, you'd almost feel like indicating just to celebrate. Number 2, the 5,600 kilometre fence that changed Australia's landscape. Australia once had a problem with dingoes getting into sheep country, so naturally we built a fence, not around a farm, not around a town, across thousands of kilometres of Australia. The Dingo Fence stretches for about 5,600 kilometres through Queensland, New South Wales and South Australia, making it one of the longest structures of its kind in the world. And the really unbelievable part isn't even how long it is. It's what happened on either side. For more than 30 years, researchers studied satellite images of land around the fence. On one side, dingoes were much rarer. On the other, they were more common. And over time, the difference in kangaroo numbers, grazing and vegetation became so strong that researchers could actually see the effect from space. That is ridiculous when you think about it. Australia put up a fence to stop dingoes and eventually changed the landscape enough for satellites to notice. Most fences tell the neighbour where your backyard ends. Ours started changing ecosystems. Number 3, the tiny Australian island where the inside of the Earth came to the surface. Way down in the Southern Ocean, roughly halfway between Tasmania and Antarctica, is a little piece of Australian territory called Macquarie Island. It's only about 34 kilometres long and around 5 kilometres wide. But what is underneath it makes this place one of the strangest islands on Earth. Normally, rocks from the Earth's mantle are buried kilometres beneath the ocean floor. You don't go for a walk and find them sitting beside you, except here. Tectonic forces push parts of Macquarie Island upward from around 6 kilometres beneath the ocean floor, bringing rocks from deep inside the Earth all the way above sea level. Geoscience Australia says it is the only place on Earth where rocks from the Earth's mantle are exposed above sea level. So you can stand on this tiny Australian island and look at rock that normally belongs kilometres beneath your feet. And somehow that's not even something most Australians grow up hearing about. We learn the states, we learn the capitals, we learn where Uluru is. Meanwhile, Australia has apparently got part of the inside of the planet sticking out of the ocean and nobody thought to make a bigger fuss about it. That is Australia for you. Even the geography is showing off. Coming up, we've still got some of the strangest Australian facts to go, including a few that sound completely impossible until you see the numbers. And by the way, if Australia is somewhere you'd love to visit, you're thinking about moving here, or you're simply curious about what life in Australia is really like, hit subscribe to Living in Australia Tips and Tricks. We cover everything from everyday life and costs to the strange little things about Australia that nobody thinks to tell you. Number 4, the biggest Australian lake that barely ever turns up. Australia's biggest salt lake has one slight problem. Most of the time, it looks like somebody forgot to add the water. Kati Thanda Lake Eyre in South Australia is enormous, and its lowest point sits about 15 metres below sea level. But for years at a time, huge parts of it can be nothing more than white salt and cracked earth. Then enough rain falls hundreds of kilometres away, water starts making its way through the outback river systems, and suddenly the desert begins turning into a lake. And when I say suddenly, don't imagine this happens every summer. The lake has filled completely only 3 times in roughly the past 160 years. 3. Australia's largest salt lake apparently has a worse attendance record than some people at work. And when the water does arrive, thousands of birds can turn up from enormous distances, including birds travelling from as far away as China and Japan. Which raises another question. How do the birds know? There can be a giant dry salt pan in the middle of Australia for years. Then it fills with water, and apparently every pelican in the country gets the memo. So yes, Australia has a massive lake. You just need to catch it on one of the days it remembers it's a lake. Number 5. The Australian island that has literally been getting bigger. Here's one that plenty of Australians probably don't even know exists. Way down in the Southern Ocean are 2 Australian territories called Heard Island and the McDonald Islands. And one of them has actually been growing. McDonald Island is now roughly twice the size it was in 1980. Not because people built on it or dumped extra land there. Volcanic eruptions have pushed out lava, the lava cooled, and new land was literally added to the island. It has also become almost 100 metres higher. So while most islands spend thousands of years slowly being worn away by the ocean, this Australian island has basically been doing the opposite. It's been making more of itself, and then things get even stranger. Right nearby is Heard Island, which has an active volcano called Big Ben. Its highest point, Mawson Peak, rises about 2,745 metres above sea level. That makes it higher than Mount Kosciuszko on the Australian mainland. So all those years at school hearing that Mount Kosciuszko was Australia's highest mountain, well, there was a rather large volcanic footnote sitting way out in the Southern Ocean. And because these islands are so remote, most Australians will never see them, which is probably why Australia managed to hide a growing island and a taller mountain without most of us noticing. Number 6, the Australian city. That's closer to another country than its own biggest city. Here's another fact that shows just how ridiculous Australian distances can be. If you live in Perth and want to fly to Sydney, you've got a very long trip across your own country. But Jakarta in Indonesia is actually closer. The Western Australian government itself points out that it's quicker to fly from Perth to Jakarta than it is from Perth to Sydney. Think about that. You can leave Australia, land in another country, and still have taken the shorter trip. And Western Australia isn't the only place where Australia starts making no sense. From Brisbane, a direct flight to Auckland in New Zealand is about 3 hours. Brisbane to Perth, almost 6 hours. So you can leave Brisbane, fly across the Tasman Sea, go through international travel and arrive in another country, while somebody else flying from Brisbane to Perth is still sitting on the plane. That is how big Australia is. Sometimes going overseas is genuinely the shorter option. And Australia still has a few surprises left. The last 3 include some of the strangest facts on the list. And number 9 is the one that really makes you question just how big this country actually is. Number 7. The Australian borders that aren't quite where they were supposed to be. Imagine discovering the border between 2 Australian states is in the wrong place. Not because somebody changed it, because the original surveyors missed. Around the Queensland and New South Wales border near Wollongara and Jennings, modern surveying found the intended line was out by roughly 200 metres, which means if the border had been put exactly where it was originally supposed to go, much of Jennings would actually be in Queensland. That's awkward. Imagine living your whole life in New South Wales and then somebody arrives with better equipment and says, yeah, about that. But 200 metres is nothing compared with the Victoria and South Australia. That border was supposed to follow a particular line of longitude. The survey missed it by about 3.6 kilometres. Kilometres? At that point, you haven't slightly missed the line. You've gone for a walk. By the time everybody properly sorted out what had happened, people owned land, towns existed, and moving the border would have caused an enormous mess. So the border basically stayed where it was, which means some of those beautifully straight state lines on an Australian map are less. Precision surveying, and more. Close enough, mate. Number 8. The day Australia officially moved without going anywhere. In 2017, Australia officially moved about 1.8 metres to the northeast. Nobody noticed, nobody fell over, and Tasmania didn't suddenly bump into New Zealand. What actually happened was Australia had to update its official coordinates, because this entire continent is slowly wandering northeast at roughly 7 centimetres every year. 7 centimetres doesn't sound like much, but give Australia a couple of decades and apparently it starts sneaking off. Our old coordinates were based on where Australia was back in 1994, and eventually modern GPS technology was basically saying, mate, you're not there anymore. So the country updated its coordinate system by about 1.8 metres, and there was a serious reason for it. When farming equipment, construction, mining and other technology can work down to centimetres, being nearly 2 metres out starts to matter. But I still love the idea that Australia had to officially announce, just so everyone knows we've moved. Most people change address because they bought another house. Australia does it because the continent won't sit still. Number 9. The thing in the night sky that Australia is actually wider than. Here's how ridiculous the size of Australia really is. From east to west, Australia stretches almost 4,000 kilometres. For Americans, that's roughly the straight line distance from New York to Los Angeles. For someone in the UK, think roughly London to Baghdad. Now look up at the moon. The moon is about 3,474 kilometres across. Australia is wider. Yep. If you could somehow lay Australia across the moon, it would stick out past both sides. Now, before somebody grabs a calculator and starts typing furiously in the comments, we're talking about width. Obviously, the moon is much bigger overall. But Australia being wider than the moon is still completely ridiculous, and suddenly Australians saying a 5-hour drive is not too bad starts making a little more sense. If you enjoyed discovering a different side of Australia today, give the video a thumbs up and hit subscribe to Living in Australia Tips and Tricks. If you're already in Australia and want to learn more about the different states, cities and places to live, or you're watching from overseas and thinking about moving here one day, coming for a holiday, or simply finding out what life in Australia is really like, we've got plenty more for you. So hit subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.